This week on Detroit Muscle,
we jump back on our Buick, buttoning up our power steering components, and we add a high-performance brake kit.
we'll also give you some tips and tricks on how to make some artistic brake lines.
Well, we're finally making some serious progress on our Buick Regal project. This thing's been around for a while. It went away and came back a few times, but it's back to stay until it's completely done. Now, you'll notice right off the bat, it's gray. It's not beige anymore. That's because we've done the majority of the body work and got it in primer. As a matter of fact, we've got some other panels over in the prep booth Tommy's working on. But that's for later. Today, we got some systems that need to get buttoned up on this car before we do paint it and send the chassis off to be primed while we're still in the mock-up stages here. We've got to address the brake system. We haven't touched that yet. We've got to install a transmission cooler. We've got a couple of other little things, including the power steering system, which I need to mount this remote reservoir, get the hoses made. I'm going to do that now. First thing I need to do, though, is get these fittings into the steering rack. They're adapters to AN, then I can make the hoses. Well, the next thing I'm going to do is mount this power steering reservoir, but I went ahead and put the air intake in place so I knew where it was and I didn't want to interfere with it when I mounted this. And I have to mount this tube higher than the return on the pump itself. So the best place I can find is going to be right here inside this inner fender. I have to grind down this little lip to make it smooth so the reservoir will mount flat against the inner fender. Then we can mark where we want the bracket to be. All right, those are exactly 3 inches apart, and the one is ½ inch from the edge. Using our measurements, we can mark our holes, make sure it's level, and start drilling them out. Done with this. Then we can bolt it up and start making our hoses. Yes, sir. When making hoses, you want to make sure you use the high pressure hose. We cut the ends flush. That way the fittings are nice and tight. These hoses are under a lot of pressure, so you don't want them leaking or rupturing. Yep. Well, I finished up the hoses, got those installed for the power steering system, so that's all done. I'm going to move on to the brake system. Let's start with what's on the car. We've got a brake pedal assembly. We're going to retain that. We're also going to retain this factory brake booster. The diaphragm's good, so we're just going to build out from there. And we're going to do that with all the stuff that we've got here on the table that we got from Willwood. We're going to start in the front here. We've got this big brake kit for C5 and C6 Corvettes. This is a direct bolt-on. It's perfect for us because our chassis came with C5, C6 spindles, so that's going to be a nice and easy install. As for the rear, this is kind of a universal kit for 4 to 9-inch equipped cars, so it's very popular for street rods and muscle cars. It's got big rotors and calipers just like the front, but the difference is this has got a parking brake assembly, so that's super nice and easy to install. As for the master, we spec'd this one out to go directly into our factory brake booster, so it's going to be just perfect. We do need to plumb it up a little bit with this proportioning valve. I'm going to get that assembled here, get this thing bench bled. We'll get this thing on the car. After getting our master cylinder bled and assembled, we'll mount it to our brake booster. All right, with that installed, now we can move on and install the rest of our brake system.
We'll show you what to check for when adding a custom brake kit.
Plus, we install our transmission cooler.
Well, I finished up in the prep booth and I got Mark out of the way, so I went ahead and assembled our rotors. I got them torqued to spec and set with some thread locker. Now we just need to go ahead and finish putting all this good stuff on. Before you start slapping on all these cool parts, you want to make sure to do some inspecting first. And all of them have something to do with making sure this rotor fits on the hub correctly. Now, if you were using some used parts here, oftentimes there's rust and corrosion here on the surface. You want to clean that off to make sure that that rotor's nice and true on there. Another one is this knurl on the stud. Sometimes whenever it pushes through, it's a little bit too fat and it runs into the back side of the hole. Another thing is the radius of this stub sticking through. Make sure that that doesn't have any interference with this spot here. Let's see where we're at. Get it lined up. Well, we're good to go. So now we can put the caliper on. I'm going to slide on a couple of washers and screw on some of these lug nuts. That helps to prevent me from dropping this rotor. I'd hate to bounce it off the floor. Plus, it'll also help with setup. It keeps that rotor nice and tight against the hub, so it's nice and true. I'm gonna twist this thing around and give me a little more room. Now, if we were assembling this for the last time, we'd put thread locker on these bolts. But since we're still in the mock-up stage and we still gotta paint everything, we're just gonna put it together. Now, I'm gonna use this top bolt to keep that thing from falling in the floor. Slide this other bolt in, slide my shim up from the bottom. Go ahead and get that one started. Putting that bolt in from the top keeps you from having to use 3 arms. Now we'll take this one back out. Put that shim in from the top. Now there's no real big need to really crank down on this stuff. Just get it good and snug because we're still in setup. This caliper has a few adjustments that you have to do properly if you want your brakes to work correctly. You can see that this caliper is too far this way by the gap being wider on this side versus that one. So we need to take a few of them shims out, move everything back that way. The next thing you need to do is make sure that the placement of the pad on the rotor surface is correct. What you want is with that caliper pushed all the way down that the top of the pad and the top of the rotor are flush. We're good in that department. So all we got to do is take out a couple of shims and we'll be good to go. And yeah, that did the trick. Now we're almost off the subject of brakes, but we got a little bit more plumbing to do.
Well, one of the things we talked about doing today is going to be the transmission cooler, and that's what we got right here from B&M. We also got a bunch of fittings and hose from Earl's, including these special fittings right here that adapt to the transmission to AN-6. First things first, I'm going to get this transmission cooler mounted, and we'll go from there. Let's see where this is going to go. I like that. You can reuse that hole, and that one, and the drill one right here. We need to mount this thing in front of where the condenser is going to go, so it can go right in front of the radiator support right here. Looks like we can just use some existing holes, bolt it right to the radiator support. Because of the way this radiator support is stamped, we need to use some spacers to make this cooler stand off a little bit so we can mount it flat. All right, now we just need to connect the lines. All right, that's it for that. Now we can move on to something else.
We're pretty much ready to go ahead and install our starter on our old Buick here to finish mocking up the wiring. If you've got a starter that's giving you a fit, maybe you need to check out DURALAST Gold starters. Each one is engineered to deliver a torque output that meets or exceeds OEM specs. Not to mention they're all built using new components that are triple tested to ensure quality and performance to meet the highest standards. So if you're in need of a starter and want to ensure the maximum life and performance, you may want to check out DURALAST Gold at AUTOZONE.
Tommy has some tips and tricks that will have you sculpting brake lines like Michelangelo.
You know, we went to some great lengths improving the performance and appearance on our old Buick, and we're wanting to continue that with something as simple as the brake lines. Now, normally what's on a vehicle are just mild steel, and you know them things can be a pain to paint, and they've been known to rust. So what we're wanting to do is switch over to stainless steel. Now, if you've ever worked with this kind of stuff, you know that it can be a bit of a challenge, but I've got a few tips for you on doing this that may save you a little bit of effort. The first thing is tubing selection. We got this from Summit Racing. It comes in various sizes and in a 25-foot roll. The nice thing about this is it's double annealed and it has a wall thickness of 0.28. That makes it a lot easier to bend and flare. Now, I know this stuff does come in a roll, and some of you are probably thinking, man, that's gonna be a pain to straighten out. Well, they make a tool for that. That's this little jewel. It's easy to use. It just has 5 rollers that you have to feed the line through here and an adjuster at the top. Let me show you what I'm talking about. All you got to do is kind of straighten this out a little bit, feed it through. Crank your rollers down. And depending on how much arch is in your tubing is where you're going to start at with your rollers. Crank it down a little more. Now that's what you're looking for. It can have a slight arch to it. You see what I mean? That's all you need. Once you got your line all straightened out and you've got a rough estimate of how long of a piece you're going to need, you're ready to cut. What you're probably going to want to grab is one of these, a standard old cutter. Maybe you're into things a bit more faster, so you're going to grab a die grinder. Well, technically with either one of these, you don't want to use them because they'll both harden the tip of where you're going to flare. And stainless is already prone to cracking, so just don't use those. What you would want to use is a standard old hacksaw. Now once you cut this thing with a hacksaw, oftentimes it leaves a little burr on the end of it. All you need to repair that is a flat file. Also, if you didn't cut this square and it's kind of at an angle, you can fix it with it as well. That should do it. Now the next thing you ought to do is chamfer this tip just a bit. All I do is hold that in my thumb and kind of roll it around a bit. What that does is that helps prevent it from cracking when you flare it as well. You want to make sure to remove all the little shavings that fall in that tube. Just use some compressed air and blow out your tubing. I normally do that right before I install it onto the car. Now, whenever you're working with flares, you'll run into a couple different terms. You've got single and double flare, and then you also have 37 and 45 degree. What the 37 and 45 degree refers to is kind of like how a flower blooms. It's how far it opens up. Now, I'll usually use 37 degree single flare on stainless steel for a reason of that since stainless is so prone to cracking, not having to open it up as far, the 37 degree works pretty well. With this 37 degree single flare, we're going to use a female tube nut, a support insert, and then slide this all into our flaring tool. Now what you want is that tube just flush with the surface, and then cinch her down. Next is to put on your press device, if you will. Just slide it in there. You can flare that thing out. And you'll feel it bottom out. All right, let's see what we got here. That's what you're looking for, a nice uniform flare. Now the next one we're going to talk about is hands down the most common when it comes to brake systems, and that would be a 45 degree inverted flare, double flare. Now to do that with a piece of stainless steel, well, you're going to need a pretty serious tool. We've got this one from Matco. It's in hydraulic style, and we use it all the time here in the shop. And when working with stainless, it'll do the trick. This thing has a few dies that makes all the magic happen. First, you got your clamping die that holds your line. Second one mushrooms the tip of it, and then the third one, well, that gives you your inverted flare. We'll slide in our first die. It's going to mushroom that thing up. Pump it into it. Now with this one, as you run it up, you'll feel it start to get a little hard, and then all of a sudden it will completely bottom out because you can't pump it anymore. Then flip to your next one. Basically it's the same way. And we're done. It's a double flare on a stainless steel. And for a double flare, that's what you're looking for. Now the last thing we're going to show you to do is how to bend tube correctly. And I'm not talking about over the top of your knee. I mean, yeah, I have done that, but I'm going to call that an emergency situation. Now with benders, they make them in all different shapes and sizes and for different diameter tubes. My favorite tube would have to be this style here. This one gives you a nice tight radius, and this one, well, that's darn quick. This one is super simple. You just clamp her down and then bend it up. Do that again. They're super quick, but they don't give you 100% accurate bends. These other ones, they definitely do. Now this one is a bit more cumbersome, but it's a really nice bender. Also, they oftentimes have a degree measurement on the side of them so that you can tell if you're doing 45, 15, 90, something like that. This tool makes it look easy. Check out those 90-degree bends. I hope a few of these tips can help you guys out with your projects at the house. And I have to say, with some hard work, your brake lines can look like some artwork. I'm not talking abstract either. I'm talking happy trees.
If you're looking to dress up your small block Chevy with some shiny new parts, and you probably want the bolts to match, so you may want to take a look at ARP's Engine and Accessory Fastener Kit. This stainless steel 12-point kit comes with all the bolts and washers you'll need to dress up your engine and its accessories. Stainless steel bolts are ideally suited for many automotive applications, and these come pre-packaged and labeled, so you don't have to wonder which bolts go where. Not to mention, they're made to be strong and durable with 170,000 PSI tensile strength. So if you're looking to take your engine to the next level, check out ARP bolts.
We show you the correct way to measure for a drive shaft and take a look back at Street Regal's progress.
Well, we've gotten quite a bit accomplished today, but there's one more task I want to do before we blow this thing apart and send the chassis off to be powder coated and get the body painted, and that's going to be measure for our drive shaft. There's a few things you want to make sure you take care of before you get this measurement. One is going to be your drive line angle. It'll be the tilt of the engine and transmission, but then also get the rear end where it needs to be as far as pinion angle goes, and then at ride height. But since we don't have our wheels and tires yet, we can't get this thing on the 4-post. Second best thing is going to be to put a couple of pole jacks under here, get it up at ride height, and get your measurement there. So that's what we're going to do. The starting point for our measurement is going to be the end of the tail shaft housing here, but that's where that seal rides, that machine surface there is where we need to measure from. And there's not enough area because that seal covers it. So we need to figure out the thickness of that metal seal first. That way we can add that to our measurement. Looks like about 45 thousandths. Well, with that done now, that makes it a lot easier because I can put my measuring tape right on the face of that seal and I get my measurement for the length. Put that right on the face, back here to the center of the bore of the cap for the U-joint. Looks like 51 and 15/16. All right, now we just need to add those numbers. All right, 15/16 is 9375. So we've got 51, 9375, that's our measurement, plus our 0.045, the thickness of our seal, and that's our length, 519825. All right, with that done, we only need a few more pieces of information to get our drive shaft ordered. One is going to be the spline count on our output shaft. Ours is 27. The other one's going to be which U-joint we need for the rear, and this is a 1350 style. If you don't know what yours is, you can take a couple of measurements, and that's going to be the overall diameter of the U-joint and then the diameter of the cap, and that'll tell you which U-joint you have. The only other thing, and this is kind of important, is going to be your power output level, because you want to make sure you have a drive shaft that's strong enough. You think they need that drive shaft length down to the 10,000ths?
You gotta get pretty close.
We got a lot accomplished, didn't we?
Absolutely, but you talking about today?
No, I mean since the beginning. This old Buick has come a long way since we started. To say that this thing looked like it could be your grandmother's ride wasn't too far of a stretch. At first glance, the Meemaw colored paint might turn you off, but we knew this ride had potential.
First thing to do was go on a bit of a road trip to Street Rod Garage to get fitted for a new frame. They worked their magic and built one trick piece. Our frame now is a full custom setup with adjustable coilover suspension all the way around, some big old fancy sway bars on the front and back, and a rack and pinion steering setup. These are just a few of the upgrades that our chassis has to take our Buick to the next level.
We picked the 525 horsepower Chevrolet Performance Connecting Cruise. After getting it dropped on the chassis, it was time to marry the body to the frame.
With so much performance on the bottom side of our Buick, we had to make a few adjustments to the appearance to bring it up to speed. I've always been a big fan of the Grand National, so with a little bit of slicing and dicing, we now have side scoops that the Buicks are known for. Then we had to address those big old bulky bumpers, so some fab work was in order to doll them up. The tail end was begging for some attention as well, so with a couple of pieces of aluminum and a welder, you could say we adjusted our backside appeal.
Heck, we didn't even talk about the mechanical stuff.
Yeah, let's not get into all that, but I can say the next time y'all see this, it'll be time for a color change.
Change back to beige?
Probably. You know, I like that color. It looks pretty good.